I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
You're, managing director of a big VC fund / hedge fund.
I thought we were going to talk about our hair.
What do you do during the day other than brushing your hair?
It depends. Sometimes I'm working on physics. Sometimes I'm thinking about markets and contributing in our research group. Sometimes I'm listening to somebody, talking about a company, or we're trying to think about where we might take the philanthropic arm. But I don't get a chance to talk too much about Peter Thiel, and I consider him not only my employer, but he's an amazing friend, an amazing human being, and a great teacher.
What's a couple of your takeaways from interacting with him?
Well, part of the problem, you see, the reason I don't talk about Peter almost at all is that the news media created a fictional character called Peter Thiel, and the two of them are totally different. The real Peter Thiel and the fictional Peter Thiel aren't the same person. So every time I talk about the real Peter Thiel, people imagine that I'm talking about a vampire who lives on a seastead, off of New Zealand, drinking the blood of virgins to stay young. And I've just never met that person. They figured out a very effective gambit for trying to silence his insights. But I'll give you one insight that I think is really particularly good.
So let's take this to you coining the phrase, the intellectual dark web. You felt free to express opinions among the select group of friends and colleagues you chose to be around you on a daily basis. You feel comfortable saying what you think because they don't slander you for it or ruin your career for it.
No, I don't feel comfortable saying what I think. I just can't stop.
Okay, that's fair enough. But I'm assuming some of the people in your life, including your wife, your boss, some of your colleagues, you feel like they're not going to fire you or divorce you or whatever if you say maybe you think I'm taking a risk, but you're willing to go up against that edge.
Well, I mean, yes. If that's a safe environment, then you should definitely use those people to practice.
Right, and then as the audience gets bigger, to include strangers or Twitter or media or ways in which your model, which you built a model with the safe people. Now your model is breaking down because you're in the crowd. And, for instance, let's take a recent tweet or not so recent, but a fairly recent tweet of yours. I don't want my daughter to think going to HR is her path to financial success, something like that.
That was very specific to the James Damore situation.
Right.
I want to be very clear about that.
Right. So
in a world where the context is absent, that was in no way, shape, or form about sexual harassment. It was a specific to having had my brother as a biologist ejected from his university where he was a professor to watching another biologist, James Damore, ejected from Google. And it was hyper-specific to reading a tweet from a woman who worked at Google saying, if HR doesn't get rid of this problem, I'm quitting, I'm leaving, this is ridiculous. And so I thought about, okay, this is a woman complaining to HR that the situation in which Google asked for James Damore's feedback, and he gave feedback based on the literature, and then they fired him for the feedback that they asked him to give. I mean, that's some form of entrapment to me. It's bananas. And the idea that you're going to listen to people complaining to human resources for somebody doing what you've just told them to do. He's carrying out the orders of Google.
Right. So and I should have been more specific because it was specific to that. Obviously, you didn't mean, everybody runs to HR is ridiculous.
Wait. This is an important point. The problem with what you just brought up is what I'm calling the gotcha game, right? So lots of people understood that this was about biology and Google being very uncomfortable about the fact that men and women score differently on Big Five personality inventories. And that success in the workplace may be correlated much less to gender, but to the attributes of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, what have you, right? And that males and females may differ in that. And so it may be expected that in certain lines of work, you'd expect a female tilt or a male tilt, and it can be different. What was outraging me was understood by many people who tried to go after that tweet. And this is the interesting and dangerous part. They like the fact that it doesn't carry the context, so it can be made to sound different than it is. And the reason that many of us get upset is that we understand that the game that the left, in which I live, right, is playing a game of gotcha, right? And the idea is that you say something, can we take it out of context? Can we mean it to suggest something that it never meant? Can we lie about you in a way that you will have to work day and night to clear your own reputation as we attempt to make you null and void? That's the tweet you're talking about. And one of the things that was fascinating about it was that it had a tremendous amount of support. And the news media, I saw it on MSNBC. People were trying to construe it as something it wasn't. So anyway, what would you like to say about that tweet?
So, and by the way, I've had maybe an experience on the same level. Like one time I wrote an article about an evening out with my daughter on her birthday, and that basically asking please everywhere allowed us to open doors at various places where doors were closed to us. And someone wrote an article against me saying, and she said specifically in her article, imagine the last part of every sentence in James's article was because I'm a white male. And she got millions of views on her article.
Yeah.
And people were threatening me physically. I got death threats.
Right.
It was all over everything. And people who had previously been strong readers of mine were, left. And it was very personally frustrating and affected my income. Perhaps it's hard to judge. Right. They got me, and it was completely ridiculous too.
Right.
In the same way. But so given this experience, given that I felt safe initially with my readership writing this, and that obviously they would know what I meant, and obviously you thought people would know what you meant. Now you're expanding out to a crowd where they don't quite. They're playing the game gotcha, which you had never experienced that with your crowd of close associates, and you've widened this audience. So now you're able to. Again, there's a missing neutrino all of a sudden. The missing force is that people in a large enough group are not going to quite understand, or there's going to be someone who's going to attack. And I think that's always going to happen.
I wouldn't think of that as a missing neutrino situation. There is a scale feature that as you become more visible, the bounty for taking you down. I mean, there are life forms that simply exist in a very negative, energetic environment where they're just hunting for things that are large, and it's easy to bring large things, to their knees at the moment.
Right. So what I'm saying is that you got into a large enough experimental group that the neutrino disappeared. There was a missing energy. The missing energy was people understanding you. All of a sudden, people are not understanding me the way I thought they would.
Let's do that a little bit differently if you want to get to the neutrino thing.
Yeah.
Very interesting where video presence, telepresence and teleconferencing is initially not very successful. And it turned out that it was hard to put the camera where people's eyes were on the screen. And so if you were looking into the eyes of the person projected to you, you were never looking into the camera. So you always looked to them to be unable to meet their gaze. So you think, like the naive hope would be telepresence and teleconferencing would be awesome. The realized disappointment would be, boy, do we have a lot of deals breaking when we do them through teleconferencing? And then you would try to discover when those deals broke. Then you might discover that it had to do with eye contact. And so the failure to transmit extra emotional data of trust. You see people using emojis, for example, because text like Unicode or ASCII doesn't carry enough emotional instruction as to whether you're joking, whether you're serious. And so you'll find people will fight over text because in speech, they would have been able to give each other enough cues as to the fact that they were in a caring and loving place. And over text, it just doesn't communicate any of that. So that would be more of a neutrino example, which is what would be the difference in having this conversation via text versus doing it in person. So you and I are now actually physically in a room looking at each other. But my guess is if we were doing this over the phone, we would be missing all sorts of facial cues.
Right. And I'll tell you, when I went from podcasting over the phone to podcasting in person, downloads went up about 5x. So it's a huge difference.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And that was the missing neutrino. I didn't understand why might not have this great guest.
Okay,
so
let's do it like that. So you think, this is perfect now. So now we have a model, and the model is, I'm a great podcaster and I can count on X downloads. And then you notice that sometimes you get the downloads and sometimes you don't. And so now you try to correlate it with something that's different. Hey, I noticed that all the times I'm actually in person, I get a much higher download count than when I'm doing it over a phone. So then you start trying to say, okay, well, what's the delta? What's the difference? You come up with an object that measures all of the differences, and you find out it's not the line quality. You pay for a line with fantastic fidelity. You do it through video conferencing. Still isn't good because the eye contact is off. Eventually you realize that it's the warmth of eye contact, facial muscles, and all of that kind of human stuff that we've always known about and we've forgotten in the modern age. That's your neutrino, right? And the first time I did Sam Harris's program, I think I was the second guest ever to go to his house and record. Why? Is because I didn't want to touch a topic as dangerous as Sam's relationship with Islam if we weren't in the same room and able to kind of see each other, reassure each other, and communicate.
Well, I think that is a great example, and it neatly fits the neutrino. But I still think the missing neutrino model applies to my article about saying please, and your tweet about that was very specific to Google and HR and biology. That somehow or other, me, whoever miscalculated the response of the mob, right? You miscalculated that there would be people once your audience was big enough, there's always going to be people trying to establish status.
I really miscalculated. I mean, that tweet probably took me 45 seconds to compose. I definitely miscalculated the level of the reaction. The last time I checked, that tweet had more support. It had like 37,000 likes, and then it got taken down. So I'm kind of interested what Twitter did to make them go down. But the number of people who've said to me, I joined Google because I thought it was an exciting, bold company that wanted to take on the future, and I can't stand my life there because it's become this politically correct camp in which you can only genuflect in front of social justice, or you have to keep your mouth shut. Well, that was fascinating to me. So, people may remember it as a controversial tweet, but take a look at the tweet. There's a tremendous amount of love, and a lot of that love is female. And a lot of that female love that tweet got was technical females, because a lot of technical females are fed up with this.
Right. And so maybe I'm trying to fit the missing neutrino model too much, but I think it's such a strong idea about reinvention and skill acquisition that I want to push it. Patience then was your missing neutrino. At first, it must have been very frustrating that people were taking things out of context.
It's still frustrating. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I don't think it simplifies. I think that what's really present in this is that I want to jump out of just like the skill acquisition, which is this kind of formal thing. Emotionally, how sad that we can't actually talk in a trusting environment about, well, what are you going through, and how are the rest of us perceiving it, and how does your solution now feel like you felt bullied and now you're taking it out by bullying somebody else. Like, this is a very fraught situation, and we can't get to a more human level of understanding. I really believe that the women who are frustrated in a technical context have a lot of reasons to be frustrated, even if it's nothing more than not having enough role models of how to combine, the different pressures on women and men, or even trans. You want to do any of that. So I think that there are real problems that these groups have, and what's peculiar to our age is that they feel so emboldened that rather than making sense and being modest in your aim and scope to try to correct the problem, we're seeing these kind of, what was the Sarah Jong, like cancel men, or, she got pleasure from the amount of pleasure I derive from making old white men angry, or something like this. It's just such negative, aggressive, uncivil behavior that it crowds out the healing and the worrying about each other's problems, and the listening and the comity and the just the best aspects of civil society that cancel culture seeks to destroy.
Well, you look at a platform like Twitter, which is all about, I make a tweet, how many likes do I get? How much approval do I get? It's all, related then to your neurochemicals and how happy I get. So it is a way of achieving status. So people who are, let's say, below status on you in other ways, it's a way for them to suddenly kind of overwhelm you and try to get, it's an attempt to get status over you.
There's so many other ways to get status.
But they don't know that.
Well, but that's the thing. You can have a negative energy, you can have a positive energy about it. And I think that when you hunt somebody using gotcha stuff, it's a very short ride. Okay, you get your little dopamine hit. Maybe you'll have a circle of people who cheer you on, but it doesn't lead anywhere really deep. That's the thing that I want to tell a lot of these people, which is, if you want to actually correct these problems, that's super exciting. That has a future. If you really enjoy hunting people, boy, that's a bad business for you. Forget your quarry. Maybe you'll be very successful. You'll take a bunch of people down, but it's not a positive energy about it. And if I think about the people who've done the best by me, either taking me down or trying or contributing something, I mean, just try the reverse. Try both if you have to, but try contributing to somebody's well. Give them some positive feedback, constructive feedback, if you don't like something they did.
And yet outrage porn is almost like an addiction. So and it's getting larger and larger.
Well, this is what I talked about outrage templates recently. So for example, I claim that there will be an article in the not too distant future which will show the difference between women being highly dressed up and men being dressed down. and it will then come with some commentary about this picture beautifully shows us the different standards to which women are held. Well, how do I know that? Because it's a template, because I've read that story multiple times. And that outrage template it's reusable. And so they've figured out what we find outrageous. And what we haven't understood is if it's a template, don't bother reacting to the story, react to the series of stories.
Right, but people are incapable of doing that. So you're capable of doing that because you've got your robot, you're seeing what...
This is why I push out language. Like you asked about, you came up with the term intellectual dark web. Well, do you remember before we had the word selfie? It was really interesting. There were all of these photos, typically of a woman in a bathroom pointing the phone, the camera on her phone at the mirror and regarding herself as like, yeah, I look pretty good. Okay. It was such a strange thing. I mean, we'd never seen this particular photo, and the fact we were seeing thousands of them, and nobody had a term for it. When the word selfie was discovered, it was like, oh, this thing that is in our mind, but we can't talk about it because it has no language around it. Suddenly you could say, oh, you're taking a selfie? Boy, that person's too into their selfies. I'm drowning in selfies. Do you see how Instagram is saturated by selfies? Whatever. That's a huge shift because you gave something that everybody knew tacitly the ability to promote it to consciousness and communicate it. So like when I tried to come up with the Thinquisition or the intellectual dark web or...
What's the Thinquisition?
Well, it's the... So in the Inquisition, the Jews of Spain were chased by the Spanish Inquisition into, say, Turkey in the Ottoman Empire. My claim is that a lot of analytic lefties have been chased into the center right by the madness of these progressive lunatics. And that thing I'm calling the Thinquisition is that people who are worried about, homophobia or xenophobia and all these things, but don't for a second sign up for the progressive, revolutionary sort of pseudo-Maoist agenda, those people are now hanging out as if they were in Turkey, even though their home, was originally in the analog of Spain. The center right has become the Ottoman Empire to receive people chased out of the madness of Spain.
So what I'm wondering is, what are we missing in terms of
language?
Yeah, so
concepts.
Right. So but how do you educate the mob of strangers that I think there's another thing we're missing, which is that people feel their status has been somehow stripped from them and that they only get it on Twitter or Instagram and are able to join the team, let's say, of polarized left in order to achieve status over people they simply don't like let's say straight white men or whoever.
But who doesn't like straight white men? I mean, who doesn't like
I think philosophically
gay,
a lot
trans
of people
don't. I think this is nonsense. I'm going to reject this. Who even taught us to talk like this? Because we sound like asses. I mean, you just take this incredibly vibrant, multicultural country that we should all be in this case, this is taking place in the U.S. I think this is an incredibly exciting country. We've broken the ties to bloodlines. It's pretty peaceful, pretty prosperous. We do a fairly good job of assimilating and integrating people. And then to be talking constantly in their terms about race and gender and sex and orientation, it's the most boring, divisive, invidious conversation imaginable. I don't want to take the bait. I don't think anybody hates straight white men.
Okay, I agree. So again, what's missing that this outrage porn is only growing, and it's hard.
It's not only growing; it's growing and shrinking. I mean, there's so much fatigue around it because first of all, it's not smart. We like being smart. We're an incredibly smart. This used to be the country of, Rockefeller University and the Institute for Advanced Study in the University of Chicago. We're great at science and math. Now we're pretending that we're bad at science and math. We're pretending that we're so evil and that we're such bad stock that we have to wear hair shirts from morning till night. This is just preposterous. I think it's really important to recognize that in general, people are sick of this at levels that are powerful enough to elect a Donald Trump, right? So, it was clear that Hillary was inevitable because the polls showed that, people were going to vote for Hillary. But secretly, they weren't supportive of Hillary. I don't even think they were supportive of Trump. They just couldn't stand the nonsense anymore.
So you think then the backlash against this outrage porn has been growing, but maybe the outrage porn is getting louder and a little bit more violent.
Yeah, it is.
So, because a few months ago I posted an article, just economic data points, and of the past year, basically since 2016. And I gave all the sources of data. They were all basically the Federal Reserve or Bureau of Labor statistics. The most common comment I got was, "What's the source of your data?" I had posted all the sources of data in the article. There was like almost a blind spot that the outrage porn was.
It's reflexive.
Yeah, it was so. And I kept saying, I posted the data and I'll post it again. Here's the source.
Right.
So, but nobody. Then people would comment, James, people are clearly asking for the source of the data. Where's the source of data? It was almost like I was in a mental institution on my own thread, where people were not able to see this is the source of data and it's reliable sources that everyone would agree is reliable. There comes some cognitive dissonance where on the outrage porn side, they can't see what they're doing. And I just wonder, how do you communicate with that? You do express your opinion, but you're still going to get that outrage porn.
Well, here's what I would recommend. To the people who traffic in the outrage porn, as you're calling it, that's a relatively small community, but it's very noisy. So I call it the Chihuahua effect. The Chihuahua effect is a very small minority. Very small group of people making a tremendous amount of noise, making you think that they're an enormous community, all right? So for the tiny minority of people who have nothing better to do than to try to take down people who are trying to be constructive and trying to think through these sorts of things, you have to talk to them in the exact language that they speak.
Which is your point from a few seconds ago, that you don't want to do that.
Sorry. Which part are you drawing? If I'm contradicting myself, I want to know.
Okay, so the phrase, using identity politics, you using the language of identity politics to talk to people is not what you want to do.
Well, so I think this was at Ohio State. There was a protest, and the president found his office occupied. And if it's not Ohio State, I apologize to the community in advance. But
Columbia, maybe? I thought it was Columbia.
So, assuming it was Ohio State, I think that the president said, you'll notice that none of the people who normally work here are at their desks. And that's because you created, and he uses the magic phrase, an unsafe work environment. And do you want to know why it felt unsafe? Because those people felt like they were being harassed. And so they needed a safe space, so they had to go home.
I see. So you're using their code words.
Well, the point is that they're not aware that they've become bullies, that they are abusive in exactly the terms that they claim other people are abusive. They don't see that all of the stuff that they're trying to enforce is their own behavior against others. I mean, the truth and safety committees at these platforms are trafficking in hate. The hate traffickers are the truth and safety. Do you remember what the group was behind the French Revolution? It was called the Committee on Public Safety. I kid you not, right? And do you know in Islamic nations with religious police, what they call the religious police? They call them the Squad for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, PVPV.
And so what I worry about is in these situations you mentioned, they just got steadily worse. So another example is in the book, classic book, The Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn mentions, he quotes the main newspaper of, what he calls the Red State at that point, And it basically says that this newspaper is saying it doesn't matter what someone is accused of. They're guilty based on whether they're bourgeois or not, based on where they come from, based on how they were born.
You're missing a concept. The concept is called Article 58. So Article 58 of the Soviet Penal Code, I believe, was the provision that made anti-revolutionary, anti-Soviet activities a high crime. And the great thing is that everyone is always guilty of Article 58. So the only issue about Article 58 is when do you enforce it? So everybody's guilty at all times. And this is what's going on right now with the current moral panic, which is so delicious, is that every single breathing person is guilty of Article 58 of the social justice code.
Right, which I wonder then, I mean, that's why you could take a guy like Kevin Hart, dig through his jokes from 20 years ago and throw him off the Oscars. What I wonder is, given, again, this example from the Soviet Union or Maoism or from wherever, all these examples never really ended without violence.
Well,
all the examples that you brought up, like French Revolution.
Yeah. I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, I think that if we were in 1968, we would have thought, okay, the country's got to go to civil war in order to resolve this. And it didn't. Right. I mean, the level of violence was much reduced from what it could have been.
Yeah, I wonder why the psychology was different. Like you look at even times like 2000, the election, you have Al Gore, Bush, obviously a lot of hate on both sides, but it didn't result in the same kind of outrage that's happening now.
Because they lost control of what I've called the gated institutional narrative. The gated institutional narrative, or GIN, was the central means by which control over all of our senses of where the country was, where we were controlled, right? And the gated institutional narrative was subject to a tipping point between the power of broadcast and print media versus the power of social multi-directional media. And so by the time we got around to 2016, the tipping point had been pushed in the direction that traditional media couldn't keep the story under control. So, the New York Times is guilty of a particular type of fake news that I pointed out called narrative-driven news. And you figure out what the narrative is before the facts are in. So the narrative at the New York Times is usually a very long story arc and all the facts are fit to it. And the story arc that they had before the election was Hillary Clinton is the inevitable next president of the United States. So all of the facts that came in were fit to that narrative. And that's why they were so rudely shocked, because they had engaged in this attempt to use the gated institutional narrative, but they didn't understand that we can now go around them. I mean, why is somebody employed by the New York Times a more interesting journalist than somebody writing in their underwear in their parents' basement? There's no reason.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
Given that social media and these platforms have kind of created this tipping point, again, there doesn't seem like there's an end to it. I mean, again, I agree. The backlash probably...
I think they're trying to reestablish the gated narrative, in particular by making it very frightening if you're building your business around social media, that you don't know what can get you thrown off the platform. Like, they don't have to throw that many people off the platform. They just need a few of those cases to be ambiguous enough so that people check themselves. Like, gosh, I've spent 8 years building up my follower count and I've got a business on top of it. And now they can turn me off in a heartbeat without telling me that I've violated anything because there's some strike against me. I mean, it doesn't take much. And what they figured out is that you can just threaten people's livelihoods. You don't have to threaten, them with bodily harm. Just threaten their reputation. The reputation is necessary to earn a livelihood. Livelihood is necessary to have a life. QED, you're done.
Yeah, and again, how does that end? What's the final chapter in that?
Well, I don't know, but I'll tell you where I think it's going. I think that where it's going is that the claims are getting so preposterous, and the number of people who are fed up with left-carthyism and are willing to say that it's an idiocy, and in particular, the people like me on the left, I think are the biggest problem for this kind of thought policing, because at least when it's people who use words like libtard or own the libs from the right, you can dismiss it as that kind of garbage on the right. And I think that's garbage speak on the right. And they've always done that, and it's always been irritating and stupid. I think that when it comes from the left, you're saying, I share your aspirations for a more equal, better, healthier world, but you're the problem now. I mean, you're out of control, and you're embarrassing all of us by creating a bloodlust coming out of the left that will eventually consume you all. You're going to end up like Robespierre, aren't you?
Well, and I do think, again, I think there's some force has to happen from the outside to shake that up. And like historically, it's been violence. And I'm not, of course, I'm not advocating that. I'm just afraid of that.
Yeah, but that's what the IDW is doing. It's saying, here's an alternative to violence. Let's just point out that this is ridiculous and stand up and notice the pleasure that comes from clearing your throat and speaking in your own voice.
Right.
And that's why when people come to the shows that we do, part of what they're getting is the ability to look. One of the most moving things is you're looking around a filled arena and thousands of people think like you and they have no voice. This is why, Trump at his rallies was holding the rally because he wanted to see that the public in large numbers was with him. Now, I'm not a Donald Trump fan. I want to see him, I want to see him defeated in 2020. But what he was doing was he was using the public events as like Nielsen ratings. Am I doing okay? Because if I listen to you guys over in the news media, I'm the worst human being since Pol Pot. But if I actually look at my crowds, people are cheering me on. Well, that's a lot of what's going on with like the intellectual dark web. We're not at all like Trump, but I can see the hunger. People are dying, for me to start a podcast. They're dying. Write a book. Tell us more. How can we contribute? Why? Because they've found themselves voiceless. And it's really interesting to me how a tiny number of writers and anchormen and late night comedians have pretended that an entirely different structure doesn't exist in the United States.
And I guess because they have such a big microphone collectively.
It's not the bigness of the microphone. It's the complete absence of anything else. Where is the conservative late night host who is not a racist? It's like, here's a good missing community. The number of people in the U.S. who are both xenophilic, who like Thai food and they want to travel to Argentina and they're learning Indonesian or who knows what, and who still don't want open borders is a very large number of people. I would say it's probably the majority position. In general, we don't want to be inundated with people who are suddenly being promoted to citizenship or permanent residency. We want some immigration, but we don't want a flood. And we're super interested in the outside world and very happy with this way in which we're getting to see a larger portion of our planet and experience the benefits of multicultural interaction. That community of people who are both restrictionist and xenophilic, there is no record that it exists, much less a record that it is probably the majority position. And why is that? And it's because of a concept that was highlighted to me by the founder of the Data and Society Institute, Dana Boyd, where she said we need to use strategic silence. I thought, what is strategic silence? Strategic silence is that when you punish perspectives that you don't like by not reporting them. I thought, wow, how fascinating. So something happens that's a news story. You, the reporter, say, I don't like what will happen if I report on this, and I don't want to be used, so I'm simply going to refuse to report the news. Well, that's what we're suffering from, an epidemic of badly determined strategic silence. That we are strategically silent on all sorts of things which the country cares about and doesn't hold crazy positions. There's nothing crazy about wanting to be a restrictionist. There's nothing xenophobic about it. And what you understand over time is that the only reason that this state of affairs exists is that somehow a group of people want to say, if you even mention restricting immigration into the U.S., I want to be able to infer that the only reason that that's true is because you've got a black heart, right? Your heart is just coated with evil. And it's just, I chuckle. You have to be insane to think anything like that could be true, and yet there's no counterexample. So all of the late night comedians, in essence, it's like the same voice with multiplicity 10.
And you can't have the counterexample among late night comedians because they'll get the same treatment Kevin Hart just got on the Oscars. There's gonna be the outrage, and they're gonna get fired. To your point, their livelihood's gonna be affected.
But that's an interesting case, right? We just saw the Sarah Silverman tweet from 2010, where she said, something like, not like there's anything wrong with it, but the new Bachelorette's a faggot. Whoa. Okay. So you're being edgy. You're being a comedian. That's cool. But you want to know what? You just lost the right to police anyone ever for microaggressions. I don't think I've ever made a joke like that in my life on Twitter, right? I've never used those words. Why is Sarah Silverman still with us? And the answer actually comes down to the system of indulgences, which is the problem isn't whether you committed a crime. The issue is, are you eligible for an indulgence so that you can continue to live in the world? So Sarah Silverman, who's was a Bernie supporter, probably has an indulgence from the system. But if somebody who's conservative makes a joke, they won't get an indulgence. So it's not really even the crimes, it's the selective prosecution of the crimes and whether or not forgiveness or clemency will be offered. And that's how the magic trick is done. It's not like, I forget, who was the late night comedian who used to do the Man Show?
Jimmy Kimmel.
Okay. I guarantee you, therefore, that Jimmy Kimmel is going to have a lot of stuff that would be considered offensive. But my guess is that he's got an indulgence. He probably said, I apologize. Probably he's a very staunch Democratic supporter. And that will mean that he won't actually have to stand for these as crimes where somebody else will be, in the stocks, in the public square being humiliated.
So it seems like a solution, you can't go out there and earn those indulgences. A solution is basically kind of to do what you're doing and just be as, being able to express your opinions, figuring out where the comfort zone is so career is not ruined, and giving people permission to basically say what they think, even if it's different than yours, even if it's different than, mass media, and kind of just accumulating in numbers these people who can think and speak freely. And you always talk about first principles. I'm going to veer it towards that, which is, where do you sort of accumulate your first principles so you can start to think this way, and B, I guess, how do you be careful about where that line is? Because the line's very dangerous.
Sure. I mean, I think that the first thing is that you should get a good grounding in a few fields that have incredible reach. So just to begin with, there's no framework that is more important to the average person than the framework of evolutionary theory. So learn as much as you can about systems of selective pressures, both natural and sexual selection. I'd start off with, I'm not sure where to go first, but you might want to try the selfish gene. It's got problems, but it's pretty good. I would highly recommend the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Human Evolution. It's a really great book to try to place us in context as a species of apes. I think economics is really important because markets are the continuation of natural and sexual selection by other means. So it can be systematized, and we interact with each other through markets. Markets organize us where command and control structures cannot. So thank God we don't have the president telling us what we have to do every morning. The market tells us what to do. And in some sense, that's super important as a framework. I definitely think having an offbeat history, read regular history and then read the Howard Zinn version of history and then read some super arch conservative version of the same history. Learn how to walk around history from all the different perspectives. And then I think that try to find the most durable parts of psychology. I think one of the reasons Jordan Peterson's been so successful is that he stayed very close to the ground floor with psychometrics, and psychometrics weren't negatively affected like the rest of psychology by the reproducibility crisis. So figure out what you can and can't say. In his case, he focuses on IQ and Big Five personality inventories, which are pretty solid. So I think that that's super interesting. There are lots of frameworks that you just need to know if you're going to try first principles thinking. And what you have to not do is find the wrong heuristic framework that claims that it's first principles. So, for example, be highly suspicious of sociology. Be highly suspicious of certain aspects of psychology, which are not based on reproducible science. Be very concerned about fields that were created in the wake of campus unrest in the 60s and 70s, because the standards for those fields appears to be different than for the fields that preceded them. That doesn't mean that there weren't problems in the fields that preceded them, but various forms of activist and grievance studies are definitely not good because they come from a tradition of heuristic rather than fundamentals, and there's no way of adjudicating things that go counter-narrative to those fields. Once you sort of realize where bedrock is, and by the way, if you can do mathematics, physics, chemistry, and programming, that won't hurt you either. Then you'll have an idea about what reliable knowledge is all about. And you have to be very bigoted and prejudiced against fields that are trying to hawk non-reliable knowledge as if it was reliable knowledge. And that can happen in a field like physics, where physics, has been pushing a string theory agenda, which is certainly not reliable knowledge, as if it was reliable knowledge. But, a lot of physics is absolutely rock solid. So you have to know, even within a field, that this part is the good part and this part is the dangerous part. That's part of why people are tuning into us, I think.
And so I guess it's just a final thing. You're, managing director of a big VC fund / hedge fund.
I thought we were going to talk about our hair.
What do you do during the day other than brushing your hair?
It depends. If sometimes I'm working on physics, sometimes I'm thinking about markets and contributing in our research group. Sometimes I'm listening to somebody, talking about a company, or we're trying to think about where we might take the philanthropic arm. But I think, I don't get a chance to talk too much about Peter Thiel, and I consider him not only my employer, but he's an amazing friend, an amazing human being, and a great teacher.
What's a couple of your takeaways from him and from interacting with him?
Oh, well, it's part of the problem. You see, the reason I don't talk about Peter almost at all is that the news media created a fictional character called Peter Thiel, and the two of them are totally different. The real Peter Thiel and the fictional Peter Thiel aren't the same person. And so every time I talk about the real Peter Thiel, people imagine that I'm talking about a vampire who lives on a seastead off of New Zealand, drinking the blood of virgins to stay young. And I've just never met that person. So I, in general, don't love talking about, just because they figured out a very effective gambit for trying to silence his insights. But I'll give you one insight that I think is really particularly good. Peter has this thing that he does, which I call radical compression with minimal distortion. And academics usually will tolerate almost no distortion. So they often miss principles that Peter sees. On the other hand, Peter will say something like, think one of his was a challenge where he said, we've become much less positive about technology and science. Find me a movie after Back to the Future that viewed technology positively. Well, because he posed it as a challenge, I worked really hard in my head and I came up with one. There's a little indie film called Safety Not Guaranteed that technology makes a really beautiful appearance in. But the point was, I was behaving like an academic. I was willing to accept no distortion. Peter, it's not true. There's one movie that, well, if that's true, right, that there's only one movie that I can think of, then his point is obviously mostly correct.
The Martian.
Well, this was before The Martian came out. Yeah. I actually discussed that on Tim Ferriss. It's the ultimate high agency movie.
And Andy Weir has been on this podcast as well. He's the author of the original novel.
Yeah. So but this is a thing that I learned from Peter, which is be willing to be a little bit wrong if the principle can be packed up into like a single sentence. And right, that's a boast. It's basically saying, did you notice how much our artistic world and our cultural world has turned against technology and progress?
Yeah, it's so interesting because you look at, I actually do a bit about this in stand-up. If you look at movies just about robots, either they're male robots who are shooting everyone, or they're female robots who are luring you into sex but then locking you up and leaving to infiltrate society. So it's like kind of there's this sexism in robots, but they're all evil.
Well, or the Austin Powers ones, which are actually deadly through their sexuality, right? The fembots.
Right.
Yeah.
So robots are
are bad.
A sub-study of that. I don't know why this keeps ringing. But all right, what's another thing you've learned from Peter's been on the podcast, so I'm always fascinated by more insights. What's another
Well, another one of his would be learn to live with almost contradictions. So, for example,
in both, it seems like there's a fuzziness, which I like.
Well, but this is, you see, people say he's a contrarian, but he's not. You can't just put a minus sign in front of everything and have that work out. You'll bankrupt yourself.
Right.
So he's always finding the interesting contrarian play. So one of them, for example, is most radical individualists are bad team players, and most team players are really group thinkers. But there's nothing inherently contradictory about being a radical individualist who's also an exceptional team player. So go search for that, because it's an almost contradiction, but if you can find a tiny number of people, that's super terrific. A different version of this is that most smart people are uninteresting, and you're looking for people who are both surprising and smart. Well, most of the people who talk in surprising ways aren't smart. And most of the people who talk in smart ways aren't surprising. Now, which of these categories should you search first? The claim is, in general, you should search the surprising people first. Why? Because while not everybody's smart, there are a huge number of smart people. It'll take way too long. Better to look at the tiny number of people who are saying truly surprising things and see if any of them are smart is a better search process. So various ways of just unspinning the world and seeing it differently. At some point I tried to take Peter's book and turn it into a collection of aphorisms. And, or sort of little vignettes. So, Peter talks about last mover advantage, and you think about, well, what does that mean, last mover advantage? Well, take any look at bicycle sprints. And in bicycle sprints, you have two guys trying to go as slow as possible around the track. They're each trying to draft the other from behind to get the other guy to do the work for them, right? So it looks like it's going to be a sprint, but they didn't realize that when they wrote down the rules that it was actually going to cause a strategic chess-like situation to bring it to a crawl. Well, that's like last mover advantage. You let the other guys make the mistakes, and then you're the last one who's learned from everybody else, and everybody else is fatigued, and you still have energy. Or another one would be, around people always want to throw the outliers out when they're doing statistics. On the other hand, the outliers may be all that determines anything in a given system, because kurtosis and the far right tail is such a powerful effect. And so, understanding that you're not cleaning your data, what you're doing is that you're confusing baby and bathwater. That's an important principle.
It's interesting because the same thing occurs in relationships. People, when they meet, let's say on a date, they're on their best behavior. And then 3 months in, finally one has an outburst that's like out of control. And the other side might think, okay, well, he was just frustrated or she was frustrated. But that actually is the real leakage coming out about what this system is like, what this person is like.
Maybe.
So maybe.
Yeah. But, or, people, another one would be, Peter's always on about the tech slowdown. I have a different version of this as a core theory of mine. And whenever you hear the thing about the tech slowdown, somebody will always say, look at my phone. I have a phone in my pocket. It's got the Library of Congress, at the touch of a button. It's the most amazing thing. Well, I tried to create an aphorism about this, which is, of course, your phone is amazing. It's all that's left from your once limitless future. It was the collision of the two things that worked best, which was the semiconductor and communications technology.
Well, and I view that as the reason you can't quite call that innovative is because it was already predicted in the 60s. Like Moore's Law predicts your phone in your pocket. It predicts supercomputers.
Well, but it's not a question whether it is or it isn't innovative. It has been innovative. The problem is that all of the other things that we were predicting, all of the Jetsons stuff, or all of the positive versions of a technological future, have been much more stalled. And so I often give people this challenge. You're in a restaurant, say. How do you prove, how many ways can you prove that it's not 1973? Right? And so, the styles certainly aren't 1973, but it's not a proof, because maybe it's just a funny restaurant. And, it's always the things around, like the phones, or maybe there's a flat screen TV. But there's very little that lets you know that it's not 1973 anymore. And I think we have to just recognize that the fact that some things worked is disguising how much hasn't been working. And that's good news, because it's an opportunity for us to restart all of these things that are stalled out. And so it's not pessimism, it's optimism. It's saying, hey, great news. We've been neglecting all sorts of areas of growth. And now we have the chance to do it. We just have to recognize that it didn't get done. And if we're going to do it, it's going to require rolling up our sleeves and figuring out who's good at what, rather than constantly complaining that something somewhere is unfair.
Okay, and so going full circle, would you agree that is the missing neutrino in our kind of analysis of innovation? We predicted the Jetsons. It didn't happen, even though we have got all these brilliant innovators.
Right, and then what measures the difference, right? Remember, that was the next part of it, which is you have to figure out by what does it fail. And I would say that the failure has been that the atomic world has not progressed like the electron world or the bit world, the data world. And so undoubtedly the problem is we have to get good at innovating in the atoms again, as well as complementary to our innovations in data structures.
All right, well, Eric Weinstein, thanks so much for spending
Hey, James, thanks.
2 hours talking with me. It's the benefit of having a podcast is you could just talk to people like you and learn.
Well, come up to San Francisco and we'll do this again.
All right, definitely. Excellent.
Thanks, James.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. Oracle.com/advance.